Ja, super.
Unten auch Zeile?
Ja.
I mean, yes, we're trying to build a dam for the people, but that can potentially dry the river. And is that the plan so you can dig uranium? Is it? I mean, how will the uranium affect the local people though? I know how.
They ask you to keep quiet. They ask you to be ignorant. They ask you to speak. But the time of the fearing silence, of being imposed to be silent is over.
Our solar system began between 4 and 5 billion years ago, as a cloud of swirling hot gas. And as it formed, the heat was so intense that centers of atoms were crushed together and smaller atoms formed into larger ones. The largest, heaviest atom known to us has 92 protons with the same number of electrons and anywhere from 141 to 146 neutrons. The atom disintegrates slowly, and as it does so, it gives off radiation. It takes about 4.5 billion years for half of it to decay, just about the age of the solar system. This element is uranium. What are we talking about exactly?
Now what I want to show you first is that uranium is nothing extraterrestrial, but it's the very core of our planet. In fact, it is because of uranium contains the only fissionable isotope, U-235, which, if it amasses to a critical mass, starts building a nuclear reactor. And that is what runs actually the Earth. So the magma and the fact that we have continued plumes building up in the Earth, getting to surface, shifting continents, feeding volcanoes, causing tsunamis, is due to uranium. And it's therefore no surprise that uranium is also found in the Earth's crust. Speaking of the periodic table, uranium is the last of all elements. It's the most heavy one we find naturally on Earth. Everything above uranium is artificial. So we don't have any other element found on Earth in natural traces that is heavier than that. And that makes it unique in many respects.
Uranium was identified as a chemical element by German chemist Martin Heinrich Klaproth in 1789. At that time, there was little commercial use for it.
Hey, why are they demonstrating against mining of uranium and against nuclear power? It is such a unique element.
Well, it is a much disputed matter, especially in the industrialized countries that use a lot of nuclear power. Now they also want it in Africa.
Yeah, I know. I hear about it all the time regarding South Africa. But what is it really all about with this uranium? What problem do those people demonstrating have with it?
That's a long story.
I have lots of time.
Uranium exists in 3 different forms. More than 99% of uranium is uranium-238. Only 0.71% is uranium-235. And there is a small component of uranium-234. But it's minimal, so we won't be dealing with it here.
And what is so special about it?
The uranium atoms fall apart, very slowly, but they fall apart. They change form and turn into another kind of atoms. And those are unstable and fall apart too.
So there's no uranium left?
No, the process is very slow. For uranium-238, it takes approximately 4.5 billion years for half of a certain amount to fall apart. Scientists call this period half-life.
And the rest?
Well, the rest of the uranium is still here and decays slowly. Let's take a look at how that works, the decay chain.
As you can see, uranium changes its form and turns into thorium. The half-life indicates how long it takes for half of the uranium to decay. As it decays, uranium gives off radiation. In this first step, it is alpha radiation. This process continues and thorium changes into protactinium. In the process, it gives off beta radiation. The decay process continues. You see that at each step, either alpha or beta radiation is given off. At each step, gamma radiation is also emitted. One of the elements is radon-222, the only gas in the decay chain. It emits alpha radiation. After some 20 steps, the process ends with a stable element, lead. As you can see, uranium never comes alone. It is always accompanied by a cocktail of 20 to 25 decay products, all of them radioactive, and some are also poisonous. Uranium-235 decays in a similar chain with another approximately 20 decay products. Alpha radiation means that the element shoots off a small part of itself. The particle travels only a short distance, but it is big. It can be stopped by a sheet of thick paper. The particles of alpha radiation, due to their size, can do serious damage to living tissue, especially when the element is taken up into the body with food or by breathing.
Uran hat selber und Alphastrahlen haben in der Regel nur eine Reichweite von 10 cm. Aber wenn sie über den Wind einmal in den Körper gekommen sind und dort ja bleiben und auch nicht weiter transportiert werden können, nicht ausgeschieden werden können, dann bleiben sie ja auch verbleiben sie ganz lange im Körper und richten da die Schäden an. Und das hängt davon ab, wie sie aufgenommen worden sind und wo sie stecken bleiben. Also wo die Partikel mit der Strahlung stecken bleiben. Zum Beispiel in der Lunge, dann gibt es Lungenschäden. Wenn es im Knochenmark ist, dann gibt es eben Schädigungen des blutbildenden Systems, also Krebs zum Beispiel, oder andere Immunschäden.
In some cases, elements shoot off very small particles. This is referred to as beta radiation. The particles are much smaller than alpha particles, but they travel longer distances. Beta radiation penetrates lighter materials. It takes a thick sheet of metal or a wall of concrete to stop it. Beta radiation may cause damage to the body even from outside. All the elements in the decay chain give off powerful energy waves, called gamma radiation, which is the most penetrating kind of electromagnetic radiation. It takes several inches of lead or a thick wall of concrete to stop it. Thus, gamma radiation is a risk even if a person is further away. Some of the elements in the decay chain of uranium are more radioactive than uranium itself, and thus pose a bigger danger. Polonium-210, for example, which emits alpha radiation, is many times more radioactive than uranium, and thus many times more dangerous.
Some of the radiation emitted by uranium and its decay product is so powerful that you cannot really stop it using a sheet of aluminum. And even with this sheet of 2 millimeters of lead, you cannot stop the gamma radiation, which are so powerful. So in fact, it's not possible to protect properly the workers and the population exposed to the radiation emitted by uranium and its decay products.
Besides, uranium is a heavy metal and thus toxic to humans and other living beings due to its chemical properties. Heavy metals can cause a wide variety of health damage, negative influences on the kidneys being the best known. The toxicity of the elements in the decay chain should not be neglected.
What does all this have to do with nuclear power?
Oh, right. We talked about uranium and nuclear. Well, towards the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, scientists were exploring radiation and properties of elements like uranium, radiation, and so on. Marie and Pierre Curie, Henri Becquerel, and others found out about the connections between uranium and radioactivity. Actually, some of them died from the negative health effects of radioactivity on human health. Then, in 1939, German physicists Lise Meitner and Otto Hahn managed to split an atom artificially for the first time. Until then, it was believed that an atom cannot be split up. The atoms they had split were uranium, more exactly, uranium-235. Only uranium-235 can be split artificially. The energy, which normally keeps the pieces of an atom together, was released. Since that invention, life on our planet has not been the same.
Oh, so this energy which keeps things like atoms together was set free?
Yes, this energy, which kept the atoms together since the Earth was created, was released. It is called nuclear fission, since the nucleus, the core of the atom, is split.
And then, what would you do with this nuclear fission?
Physicists realized quickly that huge amounts of energy would be released if this nuclear fission was performed in great numbers, in a chain reaction. If it is used in an uncontrolled way, it creates an explosion, a nuclear bomb.
Whoa, so I see where nuclear bombs come from. Did they also succeed to control that process?
Yes, if the chain reaction and the energy release are controlled, it can be used for power generation, a nuclear power plant. The first one who managed to do so was Enrico Fermi, an Italian scientist, and his team. They worked in the USA.
So this is why companies are interested in uranium?
Right. They want to dig up uranium to use it for nuclear weapons or for nuclear power plants.
When in 1938 German scientists Lise Meitner and Otto Hahn had performed the first artificial nuclear fission, it marked the beginning of the nuclear age. At that time, tensions between the states in Europe ran high, the eve of World War II. Scientists and military quickly realized that a country which could develop a weapon from the discovery of nuclear fission would have immense advantages over their enemies and would win the war. To build such a weapon, uranium was needed. It was important to find it at any cost.
The very beginning of nuclear weapons had a connection to Africa. The uranium for the bombs came from Africa, came from the province of Katanga in the DRC. And during World War II, the Americans built the weapons in the United States. That was the start of the nuclear weapons industry. What was supposed to happen was, at the end of the war, the countries with weapons should have handed them into the United Nations. But instead, we had the Cold War, where countries kept their own weapons and began an arms race based on those weapons. But the world had not, although uranium is plentiful in the world, at that point in the 1940s, there wasn't very much around because no one until then had realized the commercial value of uranium.
In 1953, US President Eisenhower announced the program Atoms for Peace to make nuclear technology more acceptable. The first commercial nuclear power plant went into operation in 1956 in the United Kingdom and 1958 in the United States. As of July 2018, 413 reactors are in operation worldwide. They provide approximately 10% of the electricity used in the world. 50 nuclear power plants are currently under construction, but only 4 were started up in 2017 and 5 in the first half of 2018. Every year, a number of nuclear power plants is phased out due to age or other reasons. Serious accidents have occurred in nuclear power plants. The Chernobyl disaster in the Soviet Union in 1986 and the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster in Japan in 2011. From 1945 to 1965, uranium was almost exclusively mined for nuclear weapons. Thereafter, increasingly for commercial nuclear power plants.
So, where was uranium mined in the beginning?
In Africa, uranium was first mined in Congo, Shinkolobwe, and it was used in the bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. The US continued to mine uranium in Katanga province until June 1960, when Belgian Congo became independent. Mining is still an issue in the Democratic Republic of Congo today.
The Americans had no uranium of their own?
Well, not enough at that time. Some uranium had been mined in the Four Corners area, in the southwest United States, on land which traditionally belonged to Native Americans, like the Hopis and the Dene. Another part of the uranium was actually mined in the north of Canada, at Port Radium.
And this uranium from Shinkolobwe was also used for nuclear weapons?
Yes, unfortunately. And uranium from Canada and the US, where native people were suffering most from the mining activities.
So, couldn't we use uranium from Africa, put it into a nuclear power plant, and generate electricity for Tanzania or South Africa or Namibia?
Well, it's not that simple. It takes several steps from yellow cake, the final product of uranium mining, until it can be used in a nuclear power plant. It's called nuclear fuel chain. Nuclear fission can only be done with one of the three kinds of uranium, uranium-235. Only a small part, 0.71% of uranium, is uranium-235. Remember? This part has to be increased if we want to produce nuclear power. This process of increasing the percentage of uranium-235 is called enrichment and is quite complicated. Enrichment plants do not exist in Africa. They are in the US, in France, in Russia, in Germany, but not in Africa.
The nuclear fuel chain starts with uranium mining and extraction of uranium from the ore. In conventional mines, uranium ore is dug up from open pits or from underground mines. Then, the ore is crushed in a mill and treated with chemicals, mostly sulfuric acid, to extract uranium. The final product of this process is yellow cake, also called U3O8. Yellow cake is then transported to a conversion plant for further purification, and it is converted into a gas, UF6. This is taken to an enrichment plant, and the concentration of uranium-235 is increased to 3 to 5%. The enriched uranium is transported to fuel rod fabrication plants and carefully manufactured into nuclear fuel rods. These are installed in a nuclear power station where the intense heat of the nuclear fission produces steam and drives turbines which produce electricity. The extreme heat, pressure and radiation in a nuclear reactor needs constant monitoring and precise engineering. In the end, there is highly radioactive nuclear waste.
Talking about insulating that waste from the environment for 244,000 years. Now, I think that as a human species, we've only been on the planet for a little bit over than that, something like 300,000 years. We've only had agriculture on our planet for 10,000 years, maybe 12,000 years. We've only had cities for about 5,000 years. There might be one or two exceptions, but in general, we are a new species as humans. We do not have the know-how to separate something from the environment for such a long-scale period. It is beyond our knowledge.
So there's a long way from mining uranium in a mine to the nuclear power plant.
Yes, indeed. And there is a lot of transportation involved too. So let us take a closer look at the beginning of the nuclear fuel chain, how to find uranium, exploration, and how to mine it.
When decisions about exploitation of resources are made, the question about land use and conflict always arises. What is more important, agriculture or mining? Growing food for people or exploiting uranium? Traditional activities like gathering food and hunting, or mining some mineral deposits? These questions cannot be considered without taking a look at who makes the decisions, who are the people affected by those decisions, who is profiting from those decisions and from the mining activities. Often, one will find that the people who make the decisions about mining issues are not the people affected first and foremost. At the center of the issue are questions about land use, land ownership, and jurisdiction over the land. Land used for mining of uranium can never be used again for agriculture. The impacts of mining uranium are irreversible. Globally, uranium ore deposits are widespread on all continents, with the largest deposits found in Australia, Kazakhstan, Canada, and Niger.
How do they find those uranium deposits worth mining in the first place?
That's a long process. At first, geologists research geological formations and find out which formations might contain uranium. Uranium deposits exhale radon gas, a decay product of uranium. Radon gas can be tracked by sensitive devices, even if these devices are attached to helicopters or low-flying planes. Thus, areas with higher levels of uranium underground can be identified. In a next step, samples are taken by drilling holes with mobile drilling devices mounted on trucks or trailers. Thus, one can find out whether there is a uranium deposit worthwhile mining.
That costs a lot of money, doesn't it?
Right. Often some of the groundwork has been done by geologists, then companies come in to do the exploration work. These are often smaller, young companies, called junior companies. They advertise good prospects, and people who have some money set aside invest in those companies, hoping they will find uranium and become rich.
If you can find new places, if you can prove up a deposit, if you can sell it on to a bigger company, there's still money to be made out there. And in the south of Tanzania, at Mkuju River, there's an example there with an Australian company, Mantra Resources, which explored and proved up a deposit and sold a deposit then onto the Russian nuclear company. And they sold it for $1 billion Australian dollars, $1 billion. When people hear that story of here's a company that went over to Tanzania, poked around a little bit, drilled a little bit, and then sold it to the Russians for $1 billion, people get excited. You know, small mining companies get excited, and they look at Africa, yes, as like a gold rush or a new frontier for a yellowcake rush.
In fact, it is one true and successful story. The shareholders of Mantra had paid less than $2 Australian in 2008 for a share, and in June 2011 they received $6.87 Australian for a share, more than 3 times of what they had invested.
I heard that there were complaints about exploration activities. Local people did not like it. You heard anything about this?
Yeah, that's right. In some places, the companies did not ask local communities and just walked into their fields and even into houses without permission. When asked about what they were doing, they did not tell the truth. People didn't like that and complained.
Is this exploration dangerous, or why did they complain?
People became aware that, should uranium mining come their way, they would lose their land, which is their basic means of existence. They grow rice, vegetables, herd cows, and so on. But if the land is used for mining, agriculture or cattle raising are no more possible. So it is a matter of land use. Actually, native people in America and in Australia experienced the same. Government or corporations used their land for mining, chased them away, and they lost their main sources of income, of subsistence economy.
Isn't that a human rights violation?
So also the exploration have been done here. The company, they are not informing the society, or the government not informing the society what is going on here, what is happening, what the hazard and the problem of uranium mining. Because the company, they say uranium mining is other, like mineral with others, and the uranium mining is very environmental friendly. So even you can have the mining here, also the water supply the same place will be no problem.
Right, that's a human rights violation. Nobody is supposed to take away your basic means of existence, and people really have the right to know what is happening on their land.
Can this uranium exploration have negative impacts?
Yeah, that's the second aspect. When you drill down, you may hit a uranium deposit, and samples, they call them carats, which may contain uranium and its decay products. These carats need to be handled with care. Don't breathe in the dust, wear protective clothing, gloves, wash well before eating your lunch, and basically stay away from those carrots. The drilling may also intersect a water aquifer. Then water may get in touch with the uranium deposit. Then you may find uranium and its decay products in your drinking water. Not good for your health. Drilling may also just hit a water aquifer and change the flow of the water. People in Thalia, Mali had that experience. The spring fell dry. Another spring was contaminated with oil and chemicals from the drilling.
Doesn't sound good at all.
Well, officials should monitor exploration activities, but often it seems they lack the capacity to do so.
How then is the mining done?
In the past, most uranium production came from open pit mining and underground mining. Since the turn of the century, however, an unconventional mining method, in situ leaching, ISL, also called in situ recovery, ISR, has steadily increased. By 2017, the share of ISL had risen to 50%. Half of the world's uranium production is obtained by ISL. 26% came from underground mines and less than 20% from open pit mining. 4% is a byproduct of other processes. If a uranium deposit is not too deep underground, the mining company may choose open pit mining. First of all, the overburden, the soil and rock covering the deposit, are removed and put aside. The overburden normally contains only very small concentrations of uranium. Once the uranium deposit is reached, the rock is blasted, transported by huge trucks from the open pit, ground to sand, and treated in a uranium extraction plant with sulfuric acid and other chemicals. The final product, yellow cake, is in many cases less than 1% of the ore mined. Up to 99% or more of the rock exploited becomes waste, so-called tailings, a serious problem we will look at later on. Often, open-pit mines reach a depth of 300 and more meters and considerable diameters. Racing uranium mines open pit in Namibia is approximately 3.5 kilometers long, over 1.5 kilometers wide, and 330 meters deep. The mines change the landscape. The change will, in most cases, be final. Open-pit mines are often not refilled, since the effort would be too great. If uranium deposits are located very close to the Earth's surface, as for example those found in Mauritania, from 1 to 5 meters depth, it makes it easy to access the ore using caterpillars and excavators. Normally, there is no blasting needed. However, large areas of land may be destroyed, since the shallow deposits themselves may stretch out over large areas. For an underground mine, a head frame is constructed, shafts are sunk, and tunnels dug. Some use inclining ramps, which allow trucks and mining equipment to drive into the mine. One of the largest such mines is Akuta mine in Niger, operated by Cominac, partially owned by Areva, now renamed Orano, with 250 kilometers of underground tunnels.
In situ leach mining is a new approach, and it involves pumping chemicals down into the ore, and then which dissolves the uranium, and then extracting it and processing it. So that does eliminate underground mining. There are no miners going into a mine shaft and being exposed to high levels of radon.
In situ refers to the fact that uranium ore is not removed from underground but stays in its location. In situ recovery requires one precondition. The ore body must be contained by a naturally impregnable layer. Otherwise, the leaching fluid used with ISL may seep into aquifers or contaminate surface waters. To extract uranium, wells are drilled into the deposit. A leaching fluid, mostly sulfuric acid with other components added, is injected into the ore body. The leaching fluid dissolves uranium from the rock. The uranium-bearing liquid, the miners call it pregnant solution, is pumped out through other boreholes, treated in a plant, the uranium extracted, dried and packed. Part of the leaching fluid cannot be reused and is left to evaporate.
I think with in situ leach mining, the concern turns to groundwater contamination and whether the groundwater can be restored to its original state and whether that contamination spreads beyond the immediate mining area and maybe contaminates water that is being used for drinking or for other human purposes. And that's a concern. There is a body of evidence that drinking water contaminated with uranium as well as arsenic and radium presents some health problems. So I think that would be less to the workers in that case and more fall into the area of concern for surrounding and neighboring residents and communities. And in situ leach is a fairly new mining process. So but the experience so far is that it has been hard to clean up and restore these water bodies that were leached of uranium. So I think that is a primary concern.
In situ recovery involves a variety of risks. Failure of a pipe may lead to a spill of leaching liquid and contamination of soil, water, or an aquifer. The failure of an injection borehole or leakage of the natural confinement can lead to leaching liquid, uranium, and decay products contaminating aquifers or rivers. Radioactive radon gas is permanently released into the atmosphere. Radioactive and toxic elements may get into the environment via evaporation or wind-borne dust. If the evaporation pond lining fails, liquid seeps out and may contaminate an upper aquifer. Problems may continue after closure of the mine. The United States Geological Service stated,
"To date, no remediation of an ISR operation in the United States has successfully returned the aquifer to baseline conditions."
Over history, massive human rights violations, land confiscations, or restrictions of basic democratic rights were common in many countries, as in the 1940s in the German Democratic Republic, where uranium was mined for the nuclear bomb program of the Soviet Union. Even today, uranium mining is shrouded in secrecy.
Im Uranrevier herrschte Angst. Also keiner traute sich, über diese Dinge zu sprechen, obwohl die Mehrheit der Bevölkerung in Gera oder eine Mehrheit der Bevölkerung in Gera im Uranabbau beschäftigt war. Man hat nicht darüber gesprochen. Sobald das Wort Uran fiel oder Wismut, wie der Tarnname für die Uranabbaufirma hieß, da verstummten die Gespräche. Und auch alles, was mit der radioaktiven Belastung für die Umwelt, aber in erster Linie auch für die Uranarbeiter selber, für die Bergleute selber verbunden war, das war absolut geheim. Darüber durfte nicht gesprochen werden.
So we have a lot of negative impacts from uranium mining?
Lots of power is needed to grind millions of tons of uranium ore to sand. Then lots of water is needed to extract uranium from the ore with sulfuric acid and other chemicals.
There are uranium mines in Niger, right in the Sahara Desert. Where do they get the water from?
Well, the companies use different aquifers. Some of them are very deep underground and have been there for thousands of years. Once the water sources are depleted, they will not be replenished. The Niger mines have already used over 70% of the water available in those aquifers.
Water consumption for uranium production is a serious concern. Also often disregarded in discussing environmental impacts of uranium mining and extraction. The Olympic Dam uranium mine in South Australia, for example, consumes 33,000 tons of water a day, making it one of the largest water users in the country.
One of the concerns that we have in Australia, which is also a very dry country, is that uranium uses and abuses, it consumes and contaminates large volumes of water.
The first step of the nuclear fuel chain, uranium mining, also uses lots of energy for grinding millions of tons of ore and for the extraction of uranium from the ore. The power is often generated by fossil fuels, by diesel generators or coal-fired power plants, as at Chirozerine in Niger. Both emit large amounts of CO2. The lower the concentration of uranium in the ore, the more fossil fuel is required to extract it. Exploitation of deposits with only 0.01% uranium to produce nuclear power will generate as much CO2 as fossil fuels in the first place. Nuclear power is by no means carbon-free, nor will it save the world from global warming.
Aber wichtig bleibt auch für mich festzustellen, Uranbergbau in Ostdeutschland ist nicht deswegen eingestellt worden, weil das Uran alle war, sondern weil Uranbergbau mit den damit zwangsläufig verbundenen Gesundheits- und Umweltgefährdungen in einem so dicht besiedelten Gebiet unter demokratischen Verhältnissen nicht durchzusetzen ist. Und wenn nun der deutsche Staat das Uran aus anderen Ländern einführt, wo man es im eigenen Land nicht politisch durchsetzen kann, dann stellt sich dann natürlich auch eine moralische Frage, inwieweit das überhaupt zu verantworten ist, sozusagen auf der Basis von Rohstoffen zu leben, die andernorts die Umwelt und die Gesundheit der Menschen in einem Maße gefährden und kaputt machen, wie das bei uns zu Hause nicht mehr hinnehmbar ist.
Australia and Canada have become overly sophisticated. I think there has been a sort of overcompensation in terms of thinking about environmental issues, social issues, way beyond what is necessary to achieve good practice.
Now I get why they choose to mine in Africa and not in countries like in Germany anymore.
There is another big issue I haven't mentioned so far, the leftovers. Often there is only 1% of uranium in the ore, and in some of the current mines it is even less.
And that means you have to mine huge masses of rock to get a small quantity of uranium?
Right. If you are lucky and have 0.1% uranium in the ore, you need to mine 1,000 tons of ore to get 1 ton of uranium. In some cases, the concentration is even lower. That means you have to mine 5 to 10,000 tons of ore to produce 1 ton of uranium.
And what about the rest?
It is waste. Radioactive, toxic, and dangerous waste.
And there's also other toxic elements, as was mentioned before, like arsenic and so on, in those tailings. So that makes them really difficult. For example, there's a calculation how much of the original radiation will still be in the tailings after 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 years and so on. So you see, even after 100,000 years, nearly 60% of the radioactivity are still in the tailings. So that means they still are very dangerous. The gravity 10 meters high. So of course, it's an example how that looks in Niger, where they have been doing mining for 40 years. In Niger, for example, they dump all the waste just in the desert, and this is what it will look like if they start mining somewhere here, be it in Bahimanyoni, be it in Mukucho River.
No, and what often happens if a mine dump, for example, is not profitable or economically viable to remine, that mine dump is often abandoned or put in a warehouse condition. There's no mitigation or management measure of the waste, and that results in significant risks to communities.
Well, for example, in Africa, you have the tailings produced by a French company called Comouf in Gabon. It's really a mess. Like, the tailings are still in the forest where the people are cultivating manioc, and you really can monitor the radiation emitted by the tailings in the forest. So this problem of tailings does exist in France and also in Africa and at all uranium mines in the world. Nobody knows how to confine, to maintain such huge amounts of radioactive material that will be radioactive for dozens of thousands of years.
At international conferences, people from different parts of the world reported about their experiences with uranium mining and its consequences. None of them could report good management of the dangerous tailings within their countries.
La conférence, elle est vraiment utile parce qu'on apprend beaucoup de choses. Ce que je veux ramener, c'est que ce que j'ai amené quand même un cri de détresse. Pendant 40 ans d'exploitation, on n'est pas sorti, en tout cas de l'ornière, on n'est pas sorti de la catastrophe. Donc pour moi, c'est un message pour ceux qui se préparent à ouvrir des mines.
Just mentioned that there's a few more hazards from uranium mines very quickly. There's a risk that tailings dams are breaking. And this is not just theory, this has happened repeatedly. This has happened in the United States.
A study by the International Commission on Large Dams and the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, found that one major tailings dam incident occurs each year, with fatal consequences for communities and the environment. The mining industry is generally plagued by a considerable number of failures of tailings dams, to a degree that UNEP published a study in 2017, Mine Tailings Storage. Safety is no accident, calling, among other things, for better monitoring of tailings dams. Regardless, on January the 25th, 2019, the tailings dam of an iron ore mine in Brumadinho, Brazil, collapsed, spilling some millions tons of mud, smashing a canteen, killing 186 persons, another 122 people missing. Many more lost their homes, and the area is polluted for years. Besides catastrophic events, such as tailings dams collapses, radioactive and toxic waste may seep into the ground on an everyday basis and contaminate aquifers. Various surveys provide proof of this. Analysis of groundwater from wells in the vicinity of uranium mines in Arlit, Niger, found that water is contaminated with uranium and other radioactive elements. In Namibia, Lange Heinrich uranium mine owned by Paladin was newly constructed and produced yellow cake from March 2007. 10 years later, radioactive material is detectable in wells downstream of the groundwater flow.
Uranium has increased from 0.1 milligrams per litre to 8.9 milligrams per litre in 10 years. In general, even though the uranium mines are located in the arid region of Namibia, the current rate of groundwater flow could pose a risk.
Not only water is contaminated, also the air is affected. Dust from tailings, carrying radioactive decay products, is often blown away with the wind. Radioactive elements attached to the dust particles may contaminate the surroundings. Radioactive dust from Australian uranium mines has been found in Antarctica, 6,000 miles away. Tailings also continuously emit radon-222, the radioactive gas. It is known to cause lung cancer. Radon gas may travel up to 300 kilometers, thus possibly spreading contamination to distant areas. Therefore, not only the workers are directly affected by the dangers, the entire population living in the vicinity of mines and tailings is affected. Radioactive elements can get into rivers via seepage or dust, where living fish take these up. When humans eat the fish, they ingest the radioactive elements. Contaminated water from aquifers may be used for drinking, once again enabling radioactive elements to enter the body. Water is also used for cattle or for irrigating fields. Dust and aerosols may be deposited on the soil and on plants. Animals eat the grass and may accumulate radioactive elements in their bodies. By eating the meat or drinking the milk of the animals, humans take up radioactive elements in their body. The same applies for vegetables from the fields.
Es ist schon ungefähr 100 Jahre her, dass man grundlegende Beziehungen gefunden hat zwischen Strahlung und biologischen Folgen. Vor allen Dingen Schäden der Erbinformation, sogenannte Mutationen. Und Mutationen sind häufig eben Ursachen von Krankheiten, die aber dann auch letztlich nicht kurierbar sind.
Radiation affects our body in many different ways, depending on the kind of radiation and whether the dose is received from the outside or internally. Once embedded in our bodies, radioactive elements bombard nearby cells at close range with radiation, which may destroy the cells and, more importantly, damage the DNA, leading to cancer or leukemia. Internal exposures are particularly dangerous since some radioactive elements accumulate in specific parts of our body. This can lead to cancer, organ failure, and a number of diseases which may show up only years after radiation exposure.
Für Spätschäden wie Krebs, Leukämie, Erbschäden und auch Missbildungen gibt es keine unschädliche Dosis. Nur die Wahrscheinlichkeit des Eintritts dieser Spätschäden sinkt mit der Dosis. Aber wenn ich eine große Zahl von Menschen auch mit niedrigen Dosen bestrahle, bekomme ich eine Erhöhung von Krebs, Leukämiefällen und eben auch Erbschäden in den kommenden Generationen.
Usually the water getting out of the uranium mines is contaminated. But this contamination may be difficult to monitor, as you see here. While downstream the discharge of radioactive water, the bioaccumulation of radioactive metals in the plants, but also sometimes in the sediments or in the fish, is really important, as you see here. There is much more radiation in the plants than in the water. This is bioaccumulation.
Also bei der Wismut wurden nur die Arbeiter untersucht. Es wurde nicht und nie die Bevölkerung untersucht. Und Schutzmaßnahmen wurden auch nie für die Bevölkerung gemacht und für die Arbeiter eben nur bedingt.
Now that I've heard all these things, what are the dangers for the workers?
There are many ways how radioactivity may affect humans. Workers are often exposed directly to gamma radiation. In addition, radioactive elements can get into their body by ingestion or inhalation, and then damage their organs. For example, you may breathe in radon-222, it gets into your lungs, then part of it decays into another element, which emits alpha radiation, and this will damage your lungs.
But in the beginning we learned that alpha radiation only goes a few centimeters and can be stopped even by a piece of paper.
Right, but that won't help you if the element emitting alpha radiation is inside your respiratory tract or lungs. There, you cannot shield the lung tissue.
Oh, I see, of course. So, alpha emitters are actually pretty dangerous when they get inside your body?
Correct. Radon-222 is known to cause lung cancer. There are many studies about this, and it is a proven fact. Not every small dose of radon-222 you breathe in will cause cancer, but the more you are exposed to it, the higher the risk of contracting cancer.
And miners breathe the radon in, as well as the decay products from radon, the radon daughter products that get stuck in the lungs. And these products give off very high levels of alpha radiation that damage tissues in the lungs and can lead to lung cancer. So that is a very, very well established causal association. I don't think there's not many people, if any, who ever question that. And it is by far the most serious risk and hazard that underground miners face in terms of radiation.
And if you're in enclosed spaces, especially in mines where the ventilation is poor or non-existent, the radon level, or gold mines or uranium mines that have uranium in them, if the ventilation is poor, the radon levels or non-existent, the radon levels are going to be extremely high in those mines.
We believe that generally workers are creators of wealth, but many die poor in economic terms. They die from ill health due to their working conditions. Health and safety and environmental protection, we can talk about it all day here, is not always the priority of companies. We all know that their main priority is profit making. Now, our report of 2008 was titled "The Mystery Behind Low-Level Radiation." Why did we call it that? We called it that because when we spoke to the mine doctors, who were the mine doctors in the 1970s, they told us, no, the radiation levels at Rosing are not dangerous because it's low level. And therefore, if anybody says that workers are ill due to the exposure to the radiation, then they are not telling you the truth because it's too low for anybody to get sick. However, when we spoke to the workers, they told us about a number of problems that they are facing, and we had to discern the truth between what the mining companies are saying and what the workers are saying.
Particularly with cancer, but also with silicosis and some other health outcomes, the symptoms and the overt disease could take 10, 20, even 30 or 40 years before it appears. The latency period for lung cancer is about 10 years. So in the first 10 years of exposure, very few, if any, people are going to get lung cancer, even if they have high radon exposures. And that means that it may not be obvious that what they're doing is risky. Radon is, as I said earlier, invisible, odorless. You would have no idea whether you were in a room with very high levels of radon or in a room that had almost none. And so you don't know what your exposure is unless someone measures it and tells you, and your risk could be quite high, and then you might not experience any symptoms for many years, even decades, until disease develops.
Over a certain number of diseases, such as lung cancer, due to the exposure to radon gas are scientifically proven and subject to compensation. Often people struggle decades in order to have a disease acknowledged as caused by occupational exposure to radioactivity. In many cases, they do not receive compensation. Also, compliance with international regulations and dose limits is no guarantee of protection from diseases. Any amount of radiation is harmful to the body. Miners are not only exposed to one, but to a variety of radioactive elements. And some are toxic too. Often miners are exposed to radioactivity for a long time, their whole working life.
Und die Internationale Strahlenschutzkommission sagt dann, nachdem sie erklärt hat, man darf diese Dosen, die sie empfehlen, nicht allzu genau nehmen, weil man noch nicht so viel über die Folgen weiß, sagt aber dann, sie glauben, dass sie mit dieser Festsetzung der Atomwirtschaft für die absehbare Zukunft einen ausreichenden Spielraum gewährt haben. Also es geht tatsächlich primär darum, eine Atomwirtschaft möglich zu machen.
Man kann, wenn jetzt Uranbergbau betrieben wird in afrikanischen Ländern, also wie zum Beispiel im Niger oder in Südafrika, da wird man überhaupt keine Strahlenschutzmaßnahmen erwarten können, es sei denn, die Arbeiter dort, die Bevölkerung setzt das durch. Und hier hat ja auch erst die Bevölkerung mit der Anti-Atom-Bewegung angefangen, nach den Folgen zu fragen. Das ist früher nicht passiert. Und dann muss man sich auch klar machen, wenn wir von Studien sprechen, wenn nicht untersucht wird, wird auch nicht gefunden. Was ich nicht suche, kann ich in einer Studie nicht herausfinden, weil ich ja das gar nicht mache. Und hier haben wir es mit einer geleiteten, also interessengeleiteten Wissenschaft zu tun. Gerade was den Strahlenschutz betrifft, ist es eine interessengeleitete Wissenschaft, die nur dann untersucht, wenn der Druck von außen sehr, sehr groß ist oder wenn es eben sehr viele Krankheiten und Todesfälle gibt. Dann kommt Bewegung da rein.
In 2015, the National Institute of Public Health in Quebec, Canada, concluded that the impacts of uranium mining are not well enough researched to decide that mining is safe. Later on, a government panel suggested a moratorium on uranium mining in Quebec. Governments and companies often argue that uranium mining will bring jobs and thus prosperity to a country or region. Governments argue the country would profit in terms of taxes and royalties paid by the mining companies. A look at Niger, one of the African countries where uranium has been mined for over 40 years, shows that this has not been the case in the long term. Niger was one of the 5 poorest countries in the past. After 40 years of uranium exploitation by majority French-owned companies, Niger still ranges at the very end of the Human Development Index.
Si vous voulez, le fait qu'on demande l'exploitation de l'uranium, c'est pour lutter contre les fléaux de la pauvreté. Mais ce que nous constatons malheureusement après 40 ans, à Arlit en tout cas, ces fléaux n'ont fait qu'augmenter. Les gens, non, je vais dire, ils n'ont pas peur puisqu'ils ne savent pas de quoi est fait la radioactivité, ils ne connaissent pas c'est quoi la radioactivité. La priorité des gens, c'est la pauvreté. Mais quand même, ce problème, il ne faut pas le perdre de vue. Il est là. Les deux vont à la fois parce que la radioactivité augmente la pauvreté, parce qu'elle fait des victimes.
Pour Areva, je serais beaucoup plus hésitant parce que ils ne sont pas trop clairs. Areva, c'est un géant qui est spécialisé, en tout cas, dans ce genre de choses et qui ne prend pas au sérieux les conséquences que vivent les populations riveraines suite à l'ouverture d'une carrière. Je pense que moi, s'il me se présente à moi dans une ville qui est vierge, je refuserai si je sais que c'est ça qu'ils vont faire.
Comme vous l'avez constaté, la faune a disparu, la flore a disparu autour de la ville d'Arlit. c'est vrai que c'est un pays désertique, mais quand même, il y a des arbres qui vivent dans des déserts. Donc l'héritage, pour nous, c'est la pollution durable.
Within a few days, we found that the people of these villages are exposed to unacceptably high levels of radiation caused by radioactive materials in the street, radioactive scrap metal in the market, and it clearly shows that the mining companies owned by Areva are not taking care of the problem.
Soil and water samples taken by Greenpeace were investigated by the French nuclear research institute CRIRAD in Valence. Its findings further confirmed the radioactive contamination in the region of Arlit.
On a pu faire montre d'abord la persistance de la contamination en uranium. Sur 4 des 5 échantillons d'eau, la quantité d'uranium dépasse les recommandations de l'Organisation mondiale de la santé. Ensuite, la présence d'autres substances radioactives, dont le radon, qui est un gaz radioactif et qui est dissous dans l'eau. Et puis la pollution par des éléments chimiques, par exemple des nitrates, de l'ammonium, du molybdène, à des concentrations pour les nitrates et le molybdène qui dépassent là aussi les recommandations de l'OMS. Pourtant, ces eaux sont toujours distribuées aujourd'hui à la population et aux travailleurs pour leur consommation.
But it's not only that it ends in catastrophic conditions in countries like Niger. Also the population in South Africa or even countries like the United States have got to feel the fatal consequences of the uranium mining in their country. Damage to health and the social consequences can hardly be separated, as damaged health usually also causes economic problems for those affected, including their families.
Even in a democratic country like the United States, right, there have been such issues here with communities being treated horribly. There's the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or RECA, that has covered and compensated some people who were miners or millers or downwinders, but there's been contestation that has covered everyone, and especially in terms of Navajo women who might be widowed. There were things that proof that they had to provide of being married, for example, that just did not jive with their lifeways and their cultural norms, things like marriage certificates. So there are lots of ways in which their legacies, and even with RECA and compensation, those have not been adequately addressed. I already mentioned the abandoned uranium mines. There are sites that are half cleaned up, like the enormous tailings pile next to the Colorado River outside of Moab. So this is an ongoing project. Each of these sites costs multi-million dollars, if not upwards of billions of dollars, at least $1 billion to clean up. There are ongoing unremediated, abandoned sites that are leading to this exposure. And just like with other communities during the uranium boom, these communities were encouraged to build parts of their towns out of the uranium tailings or the waste from the mining process and the milling process. And so there are many areas that are still heavily contaminated and radioactive because hogans or homes were built out of that material at the advice of officials sometimes. Yeah. It's very controversial, right? Still to be in a position to say, to discourage communities from developing in this area, because the folks who would like to see, and the firms that would like to see that development occur, are quite powerful, right? And they, not just these firms, but also the state, depending on the location, can use what we call in sociology environmental blackmail, right? So they can do exactly what you're describing and say, we need to have this extractive industry develop in your community or this waste site or whatever, and it will bring jobs and it will bring prosperity, and so you have to choose it, right? And it's in these areas that are often prone to poverty, and so they're vulnerable to that sort of argument. And these boom bust prone extractive economies are not going to provide the sustainable, long-term, even development that these communities are being promised.
In a global context, this situation applies for developing countries. In order to get out of their poverty situation, they are encouraged and finally coerced into accepting extractive industries and conditions which would never be accepted and applied in well-to-do Western countries.
We had a widening gap between what was produced worldwide and what was needed by those increased nuclear power plants. And in 2003, that reached a maximum. Whatever was the reason, we had a massive increase in uranium price levels from about $10 to $140. Now that triggered a huge kind of activities, and many of those activities actually focused on Africa.
Looking at all the dangers and consequences associated with the mining of uranium, one wonders why countries still seek to extract it. The answer could be, as long as demand is there and the market price is high, it is about a purely economic calculation, about foreign exchange, tax revenues, and the hope for economic development with well-paid jobs in the region. However, even here one has to refer to the reality, which looks different.
Over 60 exploration permits being granted for 30 countries, and 120 were pending still in 2007. And new mines concentrated in Namibia. We had Niger being a focal point, Malawi, as well as South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, Botswana, and Guinea. Now, wherever you see a yellow date behind it, that shows those projects are no longer running because of a drop in price.
Die Länder, die den Uranbergbau einsteigen wollen oder darüber nachdenken, erhoffen sich normalerweise erhöhte Steuereinnahmen von den Unternehmen, die den Bergbau betreiben. Meistens geht es auch um sogenannte Royalties, also Zins oder Landpacht, die die Unternehmen an die Regierungen bezahlen müssen. Und natürlich wird immer mit den Arbeitsplätzen argumentiert, dass Arbeitsplätze geschaffen werden würden, was gerade in Ländern des globalen Südens natürlich von wesentlicher Bedeutung ist. But there's a few traps about that, because this is not only something where we have profits, we also have some costs. This is what my presentation is focusing on, costs of reclamation and of tailings and so on. Just about costs, there's two kinds of costs basically. I'm an economist by trade, and there is financial costs where you really spend money, and there are so-called social costs. That means costs which are not directly related to money. For example, diseases, people who have need health care, people who have loss of wages, land which is contaminated, which cannot be used, for example, for agriculture anymore, etc., etc. So you have social costs and you have monetary costs.
It has definitely created jobs, and it has also contributed handsomely for our gross domestic product. The problem, however, is that with mining waste, it created 47% of all waste in South Africa, and it is widely accepted that that waste from the mining sector poses the second greatest environmental risk next to global warming. It is because of the profound, often irreversible impact of mining on ecosystems.
All these costs of reclamation and also social costs are never taken into account appropriately by governments when they make decisions about uranium mining. They see the tax income they may have, hopefully, within the next few years, but they don't think about the costs this does incur when they do reclamation, and they don't think about the social costs, about human health and so on. So if you take all these things into account properly, uranium mining is not a good plan. In the United States, there's an example from a mine in the Rocky Mountains area. As you can see, the tailings are very close to a river. So the company had set aside for the reclamation that $10 million, and they thought that's good enough. Then at that time it was estimated that reclamation would cost $19 million, another $9 million where to take from. But then it was found that it's not a wise idea to leave those uranium tailings close to the river, which is a major source of water and drinking water for people in California. And it was decided to move the tailings to another location. And at that time they estimated it would cost $155 million. Now they started moving all those tailings by trucks to another place, and that's millions of tons. And now there's an estimate of about 100 million or $1 billion that this reclamation will cost. This is just one example. Germany just paid over 6 billion euros for the reclamation of the old mines in East Germany. Now, 20 years later, we were told, oh, this will soon be done with. 20 years later, it's still not finished completely. And the company itself has admitted that they don't know how long they will still have to monitor water samples and to collect and pump water from the old mine shafts.
What is of significant concern to us is that often mining companies come, they then extract the gold, they maximize their profit by not internalizing their impacts or their costs, and often when they declare bankruptcy or a call for winding up, or when they sell to other mining companies or abandon the mining activities, then the communities, future generations and a mute environment are then left with to carry the costs, to bear the costs and also the impacts, which can of course last for hundreds of years.
Normalerweise ist es so, dass die Unternehmen für die Uranbergbau betreiben möchten oder anderen Bergbau eine Wirtschaftlichkeitsstudie auch vorlegen müssen in den Ländern, in denen sie Genehmigungen beantragen, und müssen dort aufzeigen, dass das Projekt wirtschaftlich machbar ist. Was normalerweise nicht berücksichtigt wird, ist die langfristige Verwahrung von Tailings. Das verursacht erhebliche Kosten, die aber in den Wirtschaftlichkeitsberechnungen normalerweise in keinster Weise berücksichtigt werden. Und das führt dann dazu, dass Projekte genehmigt werden, die eigentlich unter langfristiger Betrachtung wirtschaftlich nicht tragbar sind.
So what we see is, in many cases, as I said, the cleanup becomes a task of the government, and the taxpayer will have to pay for it in the end. So profits are internalized by the companies and by the shareholders of those companies, but the costs, a lot of the costs are externalized.
In the end, the costs of reclamation may be as high or even higher than the taxes and royalties the government of a uranium mining country has earned. As a result, there may be no profit at all for a country. In the end, the mining company may go bankrupt or simply walk away and leave the tailings without any precautions, leaving tremendous environmental legacies for a developing country to clean it up. Many uranium mine tailings, and most of those in Africa, have never been cleaned up appropriately. They pose a serious threat to the environment and to human health for many generations to come. From the time the Earth came into being, uranium played an important role. Unlike other elements, it decays, changes form. It turns from one element into another, unlike other elements, and sets free energy, radiation. When companies exploit uranium, they take the desired uranium out of the ore and leave the waste. The valuable yellow cake is taken to the industrialized countries and used to make nuclear bombs or generate electricity. The tailings are left behind in the countries where uranium was mined. Tailings are often thousandfold the quantity of the exported yellow cake. These tailings are a danger for many generations to come. How to handle these masses of radioactive waste safely for hundreds and thousands of years is not known. Developing countries do not have the funds to clean up what has been left behind. They are left with heavy legacies. Even developed countries took 30 to 40 years to start cleaning up, at billions of dollars or euros costs. Miners and workers become sick or die prematurely, leaving families behind, most of whom will most probably not see any compensation. They will not have profited. Whether we look at communities in rich countries such as the United States and Canada, or in countries like Niger, Gabon, South Africa, or in Central Asian countries, no sustainable development has been achieved by uranium mining.
Now, are you still wondering why people protest against uranium mining and nuclear power plants after hearing all this?
No, I understand. So, why then don't we just leave uranium in the ground?
Is that the plan so you can dig uranium? Is it? I mean, how will the uranium affect the local people though? I know how. Kill them.
Do you want to turn our future down? Setting up a dam, mining uranium. Hatutaki, say no, hatutaki. Uranium, keep our uranium mines kwa kuwani hatari.
Good morning, Africa. Hello, world. Live from Tanzania. Hello, yo. Boys and girls, ladies and gents. I'm fine, but that's not by 100%. Toka Central Zone. Now up a high, sio mgogo though, but I'm speaking no bye. I flow like river bubu, kwani maji ni uhai, na siwezi kuwa bubu, tapoteza uhai. What will the government do if the river dries? Who's going to fish or farm the rice? What will cattle drink? I'm wondering why, and is the